Palm Sunday opens up the most powerful week in the church calendar, because Palm Sunday recognized the time before the death of our divine Lord, when he entered Jerusalem, and the people just simply shouted out, "Hosanna in the Son of David," and they waved palms in front of him. They welcomed him as if he were a king. They were so excited, and they recognized him as who he was. But of course, as much as the people were so excited, the Jewish leaders were very, very angry about this. And they were more intensely now decided, we've got to get rid of this man. So we have the Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday of Holy Week are just ordinary days of Lent. Although you might look upon Wednesday as being kind of special too, because Wednesday is familiarly known as Spy Wednesday. This recognized the time when Judas went to visit the chief priests and said, "I'll make a deal with you. What will you give me if I give you the Christ?" And they settled upon 30 pieces of silver. This is known then as Spy Wednesday. You have to realize, of course, that the Romans were the ones who controlled Jerusalem, and they were the ones who were responsible for making sure the law was fulfilled. So the chief priests went to the Romans to say, "We want this man caught." And not knowing who he was, they had to rely upon Judas to identify him. And that's when Judas appeared, went to a place where Jesus was, and kissed him. This was the sign to the Romans that this was the man. And so then, at that time, Jesus now was in the control of the Romans. Thursday is a very significant day because all Jews celebrate on that day the Feast of Passover. It represents the time the Jewish people left Egypt. After approximately 450 years of slavery, they were led out by Moses. And the last night they were in Egypt, they were told that they were to slaughter a lamb and sprinkle the lamb's blood on the lintels of their doorposts. And that night the angel of death came to Egypt, and every house that did not have the blood on the lintel, the firstborn child and the firstborn animal died. And this was the release then of the Jewish people to go back to Canaan. And so from then on, of course, the lamb became the animal of sacrifice. And every year, the Jewish people celebrated Passover by celebrating with a meal of the lamb. So it was that on Holy Thursday, our divine Lord with his disciples, being good Jews, were celebrating Passover. And at this time, our divine Lord said, "I give you a new commandment. From now on, whenever you come together like this, we remember this." And the new covenant was bread and wine. He blessed the bread, broke it, and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body." He blessed the chalice of wine and said, "This is my blood. As often as you shall do these things, do them in commemoration of me." So the old covenant, which existed for many, many years, was now gone, and the new covenant was Eucharist. This particular feast, by the way, is very important because it brings in the celebration of Eucharist and likewise the first priests. So it was the ordination of priests too, recognized at this particular time. It's interesting then, of course, that we Catholics believe that this is very important to our faith. So we believe in transubstantiation, that when the priest is given the bread and the wine, and they consecrate this at Mass, even though the accidentals remain the same, what looks like bread and wine, what tastes like bread and wine, what feels like bread and wine remain the same. The accidentals are there, but the substance changes. So we believe in transubstantiation, that this bread and wine now become Eucharist. And that's why we have such a great respect for Eucharist. And that's why, too, there are differences in other Christian denominations and other faiths. They look upon the Eucharist as being a symbol of our divine Lord. Martin Luther called it transsignification. It signifies our divine Lord. But we have to realize that we look at this as transubstantiation. It trains in the substance. And so whenever we say Mass, when we have the privilege of receiving Eucharist, we truly receive the body and blood of our divine Lord. And so we go from Holy Thursday out to the Garden of Gethsemane and to Calvary. It's interesting, of course, that at this time, the people who on Sunday, Palm Sunday, were shouting out, Hosanna to the Son of David, and waving palm branches, many of them on Good Friday, were in the crowd saying, crucify him, crucify him. It shows you really what mob psychology can do. That these people were so fickle, that they were controlled now by their rulers. The same thing happened in Germany back in the early 30s, in the late 30s, when Hitler took over the government and made himself a ruler, and all these great people would shout down, Sieg Heil, Sieg Heil. Many of them, of course, knew this was wrong, but mob psychology took over. And so we got to be very careful ourselves that you do what you believe is right, and don't let the mob control you, which is unfortunately very often happening in our own society. So we find then, as we go through Holy Week, those beautiful, powerful celebrations, Holy Thursday, Good Friday, and then Holy Saturday, which we celebrate then on Easter Sunday, the resurrection of our divine Lord. Isn't it interesting, between two Sundays, Palm Sunday and Easter Sunday, what a transformation of emotions we go through. What an assurance of faith we experience, to go from doubt and fear and fright to the fullness of belief that Jesus is risen as he said. Let's be very, very sincere now in celebrating this very holy, solemn week of Holy Week, as we experience now the joy of our faith in the pain of Calvary and the joy of resurrection.